Hello there, and welcome to Candidly. We are having candid conversations about life with and after cancer. I'm your host and Thrivership hype woman, Carolyn Van. On this episode, we touch upon themes of community, culture, ancestral knowledge, and being human with integrated wellness practitioner Stefanie Anne Rico. I met Stefanie through one of the communities we are both a part of, a wellness studio that I am a regular participant at. When I learned that aside from teaching yoga, Stefanie is also a social worker, psychotherapist, had lost her mother to cancer, and that we shared some similar sentiments on the power of our roots, social justice, and ancestral knowledge, I knew I wanted to invite her onto the pod. It was her diversified perspective that I really wanted to tap into, especially as it relates to your questions. I appreciate Stefanie for having such a varied set of tools and modalities when working with clients going through change. If there's one thing we know about cancer, it's that it changes everything. And if there is one thing I know about being in survival mode, it is being open to different entities of intelligence, including some of the more unseen, in order to make it through to the other end. Hang out with us as Stefanie and I catch up and answer your questions. Hey, how are you?
I'm good, thanks.
I think we're all good. You can hear me okay?
Yes. Can you hear me okay?
I can. How has the start of your day been so far?
It's been good. Yeah, just more admin tasks in the morning.
Happy New Year.
Happy New Year. Oh my gosh. My goodness. I guess it's been that long since we've had that coffee date.
How are you feeling so far into 2025?
The start of the year, I feel like it's just... Yeah, it's, what's that phrase? It's 0 to 100. So it's kind of like a slowdown for the holidays. In my other work as a therapist, as well as the yoga studio where we met, had closed for the holidays. So that's great that everyone got a chance to rest. And then come January, a lot of clients wanted to book in, which is great. I'm here to support them. So it's been full in good ways. Yeah.
That's good. That's the second part is the important part, right? In good ways.
In good ways. Right? Yeah.
Is there anything that you are looking forward to for 2025?
Yes. I'm going to my first Mardi Gras.
You are?
Yes.
That's amazing.
I'm so excited. And it's really on a whim. I just kind of had like an intuitive kind of feeling like, New Orleans is calling my name, and got connected with someone there who's also in the wellness space, the sound healing. So we're going to meet up and just hang out and maybe collaborate. But I think just allowing myself to follow that curiosity and, take in the culture and the sights and smells and food and all the things. Some of New Orleans will be very nourishing.
What is it about New Orleans that you think is calling you towards that area, that region?
I don't really know anyone from that region. I've only heard of it, just as you do. Like, oh, Mardi Gras seems like a fun event to attend. So I didn't know why it was calling my name in particular. However, getting to, talk to my friend who's a local there, I am understanding now there's a very rich culture and really a community, like a tight community. So I think just getting a chance to experience that and to learn more about the history of New Orleans is something that's going to be very maybe insightful and eye-opening. And how can I maybe be inspired from their community and bring it back here to Toronto?
Community is such a big word, right? Probably because it is something that we are all innately seeking. I think that it has some familiarity to us as well in some way, right? In some form. What does community mean to you, and what has been the significance of it in your professional practice and in your personal life as well?
Such a good question. Yeah, community, as I've come to understand it now, it's really, where the heart is, home is where the heart is. And my sense of community has really evolved over the years, and I'm sure it will continue to evolve. I think my guiding light are my values. So finding organizations, whether it's mental health clinics, grassroots organizations, yoga studios that share similar values has been really important to me, and also very fulfilling, right? When you speak the same language or similar language, shared understanding and shared vision and mission has been something that's been so important and a really rich part of my life. And I think, you know, as you get into adulthood, kind of leaving maybe the neighborhood you grew up in and the friends that have stuck with you since elementary and high school, and getting maybe exposed to different, you know, worldviews, different professions, lines of work, interests, you know, everything in between, you also notice like your attraction and curiosity to different ways of living and knowing. And I think following that curiosity has helped me also build a community that's very diverse. I think it's important that we have people in our life that don't exactly think the same way. I think that'd be very boring. But I think my idea of community is very rooted in values and is much more diverse and broad than it used to be.
How do you know when you are part of a community that is for you? How can you determine what the right fit of community is?
I think it's a feeling. It's a feeling of, you can say, safety as a baseline.
Yeah.
How my nervous system feels. It is the action of, again, being curious, taking intentional steps to create an inclusive, accessible space. It's feeling seen, whether that's in representation, you know, and I think all these, you know, actions, all of them matter. Everything from I might be going on a website to like check out like, oh, is this community for me? And sometimes from that alone, you kind of get a sense of that energy of like, is this going to be a place where I will be welcomed in?
I bring that up because cancer can be such a insular and isolating experience. There is a lot that's happening throughout the whole process of being diagnosed, going through treatments, and then the part that I don't think we talk about, which is recovery. And recovery, again, is such a huge word and can encompass so much. But throughout that entire spectrum, that entire journey, it can feel very lonely. There's a lot of changes in identity that's happening throughout that whole process. And I think that finding community in however way that looks like is extremely important. And it's also important to acknowledge that that looks different for everyone. When you're going through cancer, especially in a time where your focus should be on healing and processing and working through what you're going through, it could require a great deal of energy to find the community that suits.
Yes. And giving yourself that grace too, that it's not always going to be the right fit, right? And that it is a process, and kind of trusting that process, that there are people out there, you know, looking for you too, and you know, maybe sharing some similar values or lived experiences.
I think that through every experience that you might have in a community, whether it's good or bad, right, there is a piece of learning that you can take away from it. You can assess, you know, what elements might have worked for you, what elements did not work as well for you, right? Which should give you some clarity for moving forward.
Exactly. And none of it is lost. It's all a learning experience, all information.
Last year, 2024, it's crazy to say that last year was 2024, right? But in 2024, when we had connected, you briefly mentioned, as I mentioned this podcast, that you lost your mother to cancer. I'd love to hear a bit about your experience in being in the holistic wellness space and also working through your own personal experience with having a loved one with cancer. What was that experience like, Stefanie?
It's very layered.
I can imagine.
Yeah. I'll start with gratitude. And I'm so grateful that I have the experience building my own holistic toolkit that I could lean on in those times of crisis. That I already had that, and that I did have the resources to go to therapy, to, go to a yoga studio. And I know that not everyone does. So I'm going to start there with gratitude. And because of my work and the internal work that's involved in holding space for other folks, using some of that, taking my own medicine, so to speak, and like, okay, being with my feelings and being open with that, with the people that I trust on the other end. There's this internal process of like, oh my gosh, like I'm a therapist, I have this training, I have these resources, like, telling my therapist, but I don't know what to say to my mom. I don't know how much do I share with family, with friends. And it was really hard, especially coming from, in general, a culture that is very private and you keep these things within the home. There's a lot of, pride there and, just, because of our histories, we're survivors. So dealing with it on our own and not necessarily asking for help. So that was another layer to that experience.
I think like with many things, strengths could also be a challenge as well. I'm glad that you spoke about a bit of the duality or both sides of the coin.
Absolutely. Yes. I'm reminding myself of my own humanity is really important, honoring that. And that nothing can really fully prepare you for that experience.
Did you find yourself in scenarios where you almost had to tuck away your professional Stefanie through your own grieving?
Good question. Yes, I think it's easy to get into that intellectual space, right? Wanting to problem solve. So I think, yes, and to maybe take off that hat, of responsibility that I put on myself to maybe know it all and know how to handle it all. Yeah.
I think especially when maybe perhaps when you're dealing with family members, you're not necessarily there as the role to be the therapist, right? Mm-hmm. You might be, cousin or auntie or sibling.
Absolutely. Yes. To knowing my role and my own limits, my own capacity.
Yeah, for sure. Almost everyone has been impacted by cancer. So whether you come to this from a personal vantage point or professionally, there's always some sort of a shared experience. And although I am flattered by the questions that come my way, you should see some of the questions. They're so vulnerable. I would also hope for people to not have to experience these things as well, right? Part of it is that it's also a bit of a beautiful thing that it is something that connects us all. And I think connection, again, and community plays an important role in just existence and being for all of us, right?
Mm-hmm. And so much gratitude to you, Carolyn, for creating this space. Clearly, there's a need there.
I'll go back to the community piece, right? I didn't have spaces that I felt a strong sense of community for myself. So I had to create it. In some of these spaces, I didn't see myself. Yes, there's a ton of cancer patient specific communities. So in some way, yes, I could see myself in others. When people are speaking to their cancer journey, there's a lot of the yeah, me too. I've been there, right? I'm so glad that someone is talking about this because in my friend group, I'm, the only one experiencing cancer. So there are a lot of amazing programs out there. Yes, it was very relieving to be in spaces with other folks who are experiencing cancer. There's also a layer of experiencing it as a young adult. I was diagnosed at 28 years old. Very different than when you're diagnosed in your 50s, 60s. I also didn't see a lot of people of color and certain ways of approaching conversations as well. My parents did not have an easy time as a refugee from Vietnam coming here. What that equips you with, and both sides of the coin, right? Some of the trauma that comes with it, but also the survivorship and ancestral knowledge that comes with that. It runs through my veins. I learned that played such a significant role in my own healing and recovery process. I didn't really have many people around me where I could connect with on that level, and we have many intersections within us, We are complex, beautifully complex, right? It's not a bad thing. In fact, it's quite the opposite. I think it's so beautiful.
Beautifully said. Yeah.
Has some of your cultural ancestry and history played a role in your own daily rituals, healing, recovery? And also, do you see some of that come up with your work with clients?
I do consider myself a spiritual person. I don't think I always had the language for it growing up, but I always felt connected to the unseen and something bigger than this earthly experience. And I will say that after my mom died, that grew stronger. And being able to still feel her presence and love and have rituals to connect with her spirit has been a really just transformative experience in my life.
Yeah.
As it relates to my ancestry, yes, I am still continuing to uncover, the layers of this and learning about the Filipino Babaylan or Filipinx Babaylan, the shamans who were revered in our communities as a connection between the spirit world and this earthly plane. And just finding out that, oh my gosh, like this is part of my history was so validating. Like, yes, that it's in my bones, it's in my blood to seek connection in spirit, in nature, in the unseen. As it relates to my clients, I see a wide variety of folks. Some identify as spiritual, some religious, and some not at all. And part of my role is meeting clients where they're at. I think the connection to your heart and what is fulfilling to you is really at the center of my work and the framework. So that may be spiritual. That may be more a feeling of this is the time I felt my life was purposeful. This was what gives a richness to my life. And that's how, I might call it soul, like that's your soul speaking to you, but folks may have other language for that, and I honor that.
I really appreciate everything that you said, but that includes really being mindful of meeting people where they're at, right? To your point, not everyone has the language yet. And I'm sure that in your professional work, sometimes it takes time to understand your client, get that out of your client, right? In however way they communicate it.
Yes.
I think it's so beautiful that for you personally, when you lost your mom, that there was a more embodied experience of your ancestry. How did that happen? Did it just happen, or did you take concerted efforts to move towards it?
Ooh, such a juicy question.
Yeah. If you know, I don't know if you've reflected on that yet, but I'm curious.
Yes. Yeah, sometimes, you reflect back on our lives and it was this kind of pivotal moment. Other times it was kind of a meandering path, right?
Yeah.
I think, the spiritual practices that existed even before my mom got sick were meditation, were prayer, not to any specific God, but just prayer up into the heavens. And, trying to think back. I would say, I will say the practice of Reiki entering my life. And for those that don't know, it's a form of energy healing that has lineage in Japanese culture, history. Is, I would say, if I'm looking for like a point in time where it just kind of like opened, the connection to ancestry, it would be through my experiences in Reiki. Have you experienced Reiki before?
I have. I can't say that I've really given it the intentional kind of chance, right? But I'm open to all kinds of, modalities of healing. Once upon a time, I was that Carolyn, and this is not, I'm not saying this out of judgment of myself. I am reflecting on just the evolution of myself without any judgment. But once upon a time, there was a version of me where I was skeptical of everything. I was definitely one of those folks that was like, my brain just doesn't work that way, right? Or like, I just can't just sit still like that and meditate, right? It's just not for me. But I believe that your relationship with things are meant to happen when they do. Mostly for me, again, this is an I statement. It is not when I am forcing or resisting. Typically, when I am forcing or resisting, that tends to be when I fall off path. When I built a meaningful relationship with being open to different forms of healing and just being was when I got diagnosed. To be honest, it was survival mode. I was being asked to be just open. We don't know the answers to everything, and that is a beautiful thing, right? Instead of running away from it, it is okay to move towards it. It's okay to have questions and be unsure and still move towards it. I was in a state of surrendering. Maybe there is an element of choice there. You're choosing to surrender, but it was at a very scary time. The knowingness that I have of how to do things is also, and you brought this up earlier, it runs through my veins. It's actually in my DNA. So even though I might have grown up in a world, in an industry where it might not have been encouraged, my knowingness runs deeper than that. It's through me, right? I have memories of walking past altars, right? My grandma was Buddhist. Altars of my ancestors. There are things that I didn't actually realize were ingrained in me until I'm sitting there and watching myself light incense. I'm like, how do I know how to do this? Right? It wasn't through reading. It wasn't through reading books, right? It wasn't through, going to workshops. I just allowed myself to be without judgment. And it turns out that some of the things that I later learned were ingrained in my cultural history just flows out of me. So I just lean into it now.
Love that. And it is a practice to be open to that, right? To be led.
Yeah. I mean, you would know, I'm sure, right? As someone who guides people through things, it doesn't just happen.
It's a practice, to surrender. And that's something that I like to remind clients or students in the yoga studio as well, right? That, sometimes, as you said so well earlier, that sometimes we resist. We might have a expectation of like what this is supposed to be or what we're supposed to get out of it. And that often, is going to make for a negative experience, right? Or at least maybe an unhelpful one, because we're putting these expectations on what the practice is supposed to be. Allowing what is certainly something that continues on, and I continue to work with this as well.
Yeah, I think something that comes with expectations is what I had mentioned earlier, judgment. Judgment, I think, is a close cousin of expectations sometimes.
Yes, that's well said.
Right? I have just found that the closer that I am with my root and the more that I learn about it and give in to what is in my DNA, the more grounded and powerful I feel in many aspects of my life, right? Beyond recovering through cancer. I love that we live in a world right now where it's not perfect, but it is becoming more accepted to be able to dive into our past, acknowledge it, and embrace it.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. In my professional life, learning more about what it means to decolonize therapy.
Yeah.
Right? And they're honoring that there are other ways of knowing.
For sure. How do you feel about the progress of that in your space? Is that becoming more of a conversation in these circles?
It is in the ways that I continue to align myself with folks who are also practicing decolonization in their work. There's just so much to learn, so much that was missed in school, and it can feel really intimidating when you feel like you have to get it right.
Right.
Right? So allowing for a lot of grace and generosity and open conversation about like, I thought I knew this thing. And now this kind of turned my world around. Maybe I don't know. And can we have a conversation about that? I think it's so healthy to have these really, just human dialogues. A common example is, therapists are blank slate. It's not true. That is something that historically has been, kind of indoctrinated into therapists in our training, that we are to, be neutral, right? And that's just simply not true, right? We have to look inward and recognize our own biases and how that shows up, and without that work, then we might be causing unintentional harm to our clients. So I think just naming that, this is maybe, where I'm coming from, and naming like the context, of course, is going to be so unique to each individual therapist and person you're working with. But it's so important that, yes, I am a human and I have these intersections. This is how they show up.
For me, someone who is not a therapist but has leaned on therapists through my own healing, I think that if therapists were blank slates, people would have a much easier time just like closing their eyes and picking a therapist, right? Because if technically everyone's a blank slate and there's not a human attached to it, right? Why is it that people struggle with finding a great fit, right? So I actually like and I embrace that therapists are not blank slates. That's why I am choosy, and I think we should be selective and be mindful of who we work with. Everyone has blind spots and biases, everyone. Sometimes when you understand people's blind spots, and maybe another way to look at that is their view, it might help you build a connection with someone that you work with. So I personally, this is an I statement, I personally enjoy working with women of color where they might have some lived experiences of, being a woman of color in a professional environment, right? There's less that I have to explain and spell out. There's an immediate level of shoulders dropped comfort, right?
Yes, it's somatic.
In order for things to be productive, that level of comfortability needs to be there. I have found from my own personal experience that acknowledging that people that I work with are also humans has actually helped me navigate who might be a good fit.
Yes, I appreciate you sharing that. It comes back to what we're talking about with community, that it might not always be, the first person, you choose to reach out to if we're talking about a therapist, but it's also okay to ask questions and see, how it feels in your body. Do you feel, tight? Does it feel like I'm nervous? I don't feel, welcomed, or does it feel like there's an openness? I feel compassion and care, and statistics consistently show that the most important factor in a therapeutic relationship is the relationship with your therapist. Most important factor towards we might call like success in the treatment plan.
Interesting. Cool. Okay, let's see if we can get into some questions.
Yeah, sounds good.
Okay. I hope that we might be able to share between Stefanie and I some things to consider, some food for thought. As someone who might have lived the experiences, as someone who might have guided folks through similar-ish situations, some things to think about, okay? So let's get to the first one. I'd love to hear your thoughts on this one, and we can tag team on this. This was submitted from Kate. She's from Winnipeg. She is 42 years old, and she says, I was diagnosed with breast cancer in July, so July 2024. My family has been really great and supportive, but I haven't heard from some of my closest friends. Not sure how to handle this, but I can't help but feel really upset about it. How would you go about this?
Thank you so much for your question, Kate.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm sure that it is, I hear, that it's hurtful, it's hurtful that, your closest friends are not supporting you to the extent that your family has and wanting to feel more connected to them. So how do we create those lines of communications? I'm actually curious to understand what has the communication been around what her needs might be and how she would like them to be involved. I know sometimes we assume that, our closest friends, especially that we have maybe known for a long time, like already know, like, of course I want to talk on the phone like we always do. Or of course, I'd love you to drop off, some food or, some other comfort things. But, we don't know. Sometimes even the people in our lives that have known us the most need some guidance.
Yeah. I think that, when a friend, for example, goes through a relationship breakup, right? We might have seen them go through that a few times, so we kind of know how to show up for them when something like that happens. And you kind of have, at some stage, you've learned how your friend typically maybe processes this type of not so fun experience. Cancer is very different. I think it is good to acknowledge that your friends might not know, right? I also want to, I'm putting myself in Kate's shoes as well, where when we're going through being diagnosed with cancer, and it's actually pretty fresh. It was in July of last year, so under a year. We might not have the energy to communicate it, right? Or we might not even know what we need. Because we are processing this huge atomic bomb, this huge thing that's happening in our life. So to communicate our needs, we might not even be there.
Absolutely valid. Yes.
I think it is good to understand where your friends might be coming from. And also not to put the pressure on yourself to have to, figure out how to communicate it if you're not there yet.
Yes,
right?
Yes. And it starts with making that space within yourself to find out where is this, this connection coming from? What is it that I would like to be more connected to? Is it emotional support? Is it quality time? Is it something else?
Yeah. Especially, and she's 42. She's 42. At that age, there aren't a lot of people that have, in our circle of friends that have experienced it, right? We're not all getting that practice where we've had the experience of many of our friends going through this and how to show up, right? Even if you do have a lot of people in your life that have experienced cancer, everyone is very different in the needs that they might have. So I am comforted by the fact that, yes, Kate has had the support of family. And I also hear you, Kate, on feeling upset about it. It is a little bit heartbreaking, especially if you're used to seeing your friends show up for different life circumstances. It can feel like a letdown.
Absolutely. I was just going to, touch on that point of disappointment.
Yeah.
That even when we do find the words and we do reach out, sometimes people let us down. And I don't know if you want to speak to this, Carolyn, but how your support circle shifted, during your diagnosis, in your recovery. I wonder what that looked like for you.
I definitely have been there, Kate, with expecting certain people to be there. Maybe expecting is not the right word, but I just thought that certain people would be there. I went through the feelings and felt them thoroughly, of feeling upset, resentful, disappointed, angry, right? Pissed off. So yes, there have been some disappointments, and there has been some pleasant surprises as well, where folks who I did not even think at all would show up found them by my side. So yes, you can encounter some disappointments and some grief of a perhaps once upon a time relationship or type of relationship evolving into a different kind. And also with that, you could experience some pleasant surprises.
I really appreciate you always like holding, the multiple truths, Carolyn.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, making room for that also. Possibility. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I would say the way that I got myself out of feeling upset was I had to think about the role that I don't want that to play in my own process, right? Feel the feels. Feel whatever, the way you feel is the way you feel. Okay. I also was like, okay, Carolyn, I don't want to feel angry and pissed off every day. I'm in a battle right now. I'm in survivor mode right now. I don't want these feelings to override what I might need in my arsenal to survive.
Yes, that reminds me of, a practice sometimes we use in working with our emotions is kind of like the externalizing. It's like, okay, anger's here, but I'm driving, so please get in the back seat because yeah, because I have other things to, and that's not, again, not dismissing our feelings, but it's naming it, it's feeling it, and also there are other parts of my world that I here to experience.
That's a good analogy. Like get in the back seat.
Yeah.
I'm still riding with you. You're still here, right? I'm not like I still see you in the rearview mirror. I know you're there.
That's right.
I'm aware. Trust me. I know you're there. Yeah. Okay, but you're not getting shoddy.
Yeah.
Sorry, bud. Yeah. Like you're one in the back seat, right? Don't make me put you in the trunk, right? Right? So yes. I think totally valid to feel like angry, disappointment, however way you feel, Kate, like totally valid. So normal. I can say that this is a common thing that comes up. You mentioned in the question as well, like it's really great that you can also, while you are feeling upset, you are also feeling grateful for those who are there for you. Be open to movements and shifts in your relationship in whatever direction they go. Yes, including those that might, dwindle out, right? And be open and pay attention to relationships that might come your way through this as well. Right? In these cases, this is why sometimes joining a cancer-specific community might be helpful because there's already a connection point.
Yes. And as you said, this is not an isolated experience, that it is common, you know, in the shifts in our relationships, and that you're never alone in that.
Yeah. I know it's not as simple and one-dimensional as like, just pay attention to the positive, right? Mm-hmm. Like, I know that, right? This is a shitty scenario. This is not a fun scenario. So it's not a but, it's rather more of an and. Sometimes people need time as well, right? I also have learned that sometimes when people hear cancer, it triggers perhaps experiences within them. Maybe they have gone through things in their family. They don't really know how to behave, when it comes to that topic, right? Like some awkwardness might come about. So that's not for you to worry about, by the way, right? That's not your weight to bear, but it might just explain things a little bit. Yes. Give you a little bit more insight into it, perhaps.
Yeah. Offer some perspective when it can feel so personal.
I hope that helps, Kate, with just some things to think about. Glad you're still rocking it out into 2025. And I, too, am very grateful that you have some solid family members that have been with you. Again, very normal for relationships to evolve. They could also evolve in a good way as well. Okay, so I want to bring up a question that speaks to something that we spoke about earlier. This is a question from Aparna. She's in Toronto. She's 36 years old. She says, I have joined a few cancer community groups and events and conferences. And even though I am with my people, and she quotation marked this, my people being other folks going through a cancer diagnosis, she still in some ways feels disconnected and uncomfortable. I followed up with her and I asked if she could share a little bit more about this. And she mentioned that she finds herself being very quiet and not feeling comfortable in sharing in some of these environments. And she says, but I should be able to share because I'm with my people.
Well, thank you, Aparna, for these questions. My first thought is how judgment and expectation has been like a recurring theme in our conversation around how I should feel or how this should look like.
Try not to should yourself. The operative word there is try. Because it's hard. I get it.
Yes, I totally agree. And redefining, our evolving sense of community and my people. And what does that mean? And also to kind of evaluate, self-reflect on what does it mean to be with your people? Kind of going back to earlier in our conversation. Is it the heart, the shared values, shared interests? Is it the feeling of dropping your shoulders, right?
How might Aparna identify who her people are? I think she expected this to be her people because of the common cancer experience, yet she shares that she's not experiencing herself. She feels closed. Right?
Yes, yeah. And it's sometimes, being in situations where we feel like, no, there's something that's not a right fit for me, where we get to know, what does feel like a right fit, right? And that's not to say that, the communities that she's involved with now cannot, evolve, right? And kind of co-create together. But to answer your question, I think it's a mix of, introspection and also taking a risk, and joining, communities that we feel maybe a natural curiosity towards, right? Maybe that could be around like similar interests, hobbies, that could be around, other parts of your identity as well.
Something that I asked Aparna when I followed up with her was, just tell me a little bit more about yourself. I didn't specifically ask, are you a woman of color? Or what your sexual identity is,
yes.
Right? I just allowed her to share whatever she wanted to share about herself. She did share she's a woman of color. She did share that she comes from an East Asian background. She shared that she is queer. So those might be good areas to start, right? Maybe those are hints to you, Aparna. If you feel a connection to the point where that's something that you just voluntarily shared with me, you might feel connected to being a woman of color. Seems like you might feel connected to your East Asian background, your queer identity. Maybe those are good starting points of traits to perhaps seek when connecting with groups, individuals, communities.
Yes, I totally agree. It might take some, trial and error in seeking these communities. Maybe it is, tapping into our friend circles and sharing, like, I'm interested in this. Do you know of any communities that provide a space? It could be folks that you find on social media, right? There's so many ways to build community. And I just named that because sometimes there's the assumption that this should just happen organically, right? Like as it does maybe when we were younger and we are, spending so many hours with people, in our neighborhoods and in schools. But it's okay and it's normal to seek these communities out.
Earlier, I asked a question to you, Stefanie, about how to know if you are in a community that suits you well. And you mentioned that sometimes it can come down to a feeling. So maybe, Aparna, as you experiment, maybe reflect on physical spaces, groups of people, topics of conversation, the smells, the sights, everything that might have been around when you have felt the most comfortable. The goal feeling that you have, whatever that might be, have you felt that at some point in your life? And what might have been present or around in those circumstances? Might give you some hints.
Yes, yeah, I couldn't have said it better. And, that was the piece of introspection that I had briefly alluded to. But the way that you shared it and looking towards our senses, right? Things that we, find beautiful or things that make us feel good, whether it's like physical spaces or, textures, right? These are all important hints, clues towards like what does make us feel, in community care.
Yeah, that comfort, that safety, shoulders dropped, however way you feel when things are flowing out of you. Because Aparna mentioned she feels closed up, some tightness. And I presume that you don't always feel that way, right? I like to believe that there is a version of Aparna that feels open. I also know that experiencing cancer comes with a lot of unfamiliarity and unpredictable elements, right? So something to consider is seeking familiarity, comfort, right? The opposite.
Absolutely. Yeah. That those ways in which we can kind of ground ourselves.
Yeah, especially when things feel kind of spinny and chaotic, which is a very real experience going through a cancer diagnosis and treatment and recovery. Okay, so Aparna, I hope that gives you some things to think about, all right? I want to address a question that has to do with not someone who has been diagnosed themselves, but someone who is experiencing someone outside of themselves going through a diagnosis. So Francine lives in Vancouver, says a good friend of mine was diagnosed with lung cancer in February 2024, so almost a year from now. At one point, it seemed like she was getting better. There was some progress. I started to see more of who I remember my friend used to be. But over the past months, she seems to be getting worse, and Francine's getting really worried. I want to continue showing up for her, but it's getting overwhelming. And Francine mentions that part of the overwhelm is feeling really upset and resentful that nobody in her friend's life seems to be showing up and doesn't really know how to handle it, because Francine wants to continue to show up. I followed up with Francine and just asked, what is the main feeling or emotion attached to this? And Francine mentioned, and reluctantly, right? It was hard for Francine to admit this, but Francine said, pissed off, angry.
Yeah, that is so tough.
Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you, Francine, for your vulnerability and honoring that. Like, yeah, I am pissed off. I am angry.
Yeah.
I am resentful. And, you're recognizing your feelings and it's telling you something.
Yeah.
And I can imagine that this is, directly linked to both the care that I feel, for your friends, and the responsibility of that. And then also, of course, the hurt and the heartbreak of your friend recovering, right? And then more recently, having, more health challenges.
I feel for Francine. Like, it seems like a hurricane of emotions, which is totally valid given, what's been happening. I think it is very evident that Francine is such a good friend, because part of that anger and resentment is probably on behalf of your friend, wishing that your friend could have more support. And Francine actually mentioned resentment, right? Perhaps Francine's friend might have expected more people to show up, and it's essentially just been Francine that's been there, right? So I totally understand feeling upset and frustrated. I also do think that it is important and valid to be mindful of your own well-being as well. I don't know what it's like to be a caregiver, but I can come from the perspective of observing my caregiver. My mom was my person. I did have other people check in on me, friends, other family members, but she was my person, there with me for all the appointments, at my bedside. She actually went into early retirement because she's like, My daughter needs me. It was really hard for me to see my mom go through tough times while I'm going through my thing, that she's having a tough time. So that was really tough for me. So I am eternally grateful for anyone that supported her through it. I totally acknowledge that it could be a great deal of weight, energy for a caregiver. So, Francine, I know it seems like you might not be able to depend on your friends' family members for help. If you haven't tried to maybe connect with any of them and ask for support, try it. Is there anyone in your life that you can maybe ask for some support? Right? Again, I want to acknowledge that caregivers need support as well through this.
Absolutely. Care for the caregivers, right? And there are support groups I know that exist for this exact thing, because it can be such a weight and responsibility to be the primary caregiver. Yes, and to listen to your body when it's saying, I am at my limit. What would it mean if you were to continue to push past that, right? How would that impact you and the relationship with your friends, and and vice versa? But how could the relationship benefit if you also were to take time for yourself, if you also were to have your own, ecosystem, your own village as well, to share in that responsibility and care?
It's tough because when, if Francine knows that if they take a break, that no one is going to show up for them, that can put a lot of pressure, right? Because obviously you don't want to feel like you've abandoned your friend, right? Especially when you are at the front line, seeing how much impact your care and support has on your friends. To feel like you're leaving them without that, I can imagine can come with a whole slew of feelings as well. So again, if you don't necessarily have the influence to drum up more support for your friend directly, can you do that for yourself? Are there friends, family members, community members for you that might be able to help you with your role with caregiving? Maybe. You can ask the questions, right?
Yeah, you can ask the questions. And on a personal note, I wanted to be there for my mother as much as she needed. And at the same time, my mother said, no, it's okay. Even though I know she could, really use the support. So it was kind of like a ongoing conversation in between, honoring that, okay, I think, no, mom really just wants space right now. Like, she just wants space. It's okay. I don't have to be bedside with her, 24/7. And also, when we see that, no, they could really use support, and maybe it's just through their own comfort in receiving, being able to receive that support. So yeah, all that's to say is this also a conversation with your friend, Francine, about what supports does she feel that she needs? And maybe there are other ways to support that maybe are less energy, maybe like taxing on you, something that feels a little bit, lighter to support you as well.
Really good point, Stefanie. I'm so glad you brought that up because, especially when you're experiencing cancer, sometimes you feel like you're losing agency on your own body, on your own life. So it's so important, Francine, if you haven't done so already, and I'm sure you're doing this as you connect with your friend, to check in with them. We might not always know what our loved ones with cancer need, and we want to allow them to inform what that might be, right? Maybe there are things that your friend might communicate that could easily be taken care of from someone else or through another way. Maybe, Francine, your friend might share to you that they really appreciate you at being there as someone to talk to about things that are not related to cancer, right? So maybe you learn that is the way, that is the most meaningful way, based on what your friend is sharing with you, that you show up, right? So you might know, okay, maybe these other things that I was doing, right, might not be as meaningful to them, but they specifically called out the fact that they love it when I do this. So maybe when I show up, I can put my energy into playing that role for my friend.
Love that. Knowing your role. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So I think really, gaining some insight from your friend, what might be especially helpful with regards to showing up to support. So it is always good to have that conversation as opposed to making some assumptions. Lots of emotions, which are all valid. Try to take care of yourself. Lean into your own community, your own support system. Perhaps gain some insight from your friend who is experiencing cancer so that you can learn a little bit more and perhaps round up some others to help you with this as well. Okay?
The best of luck, Francine.
Yeah, best of luck, Francine.
And everyone, all the listeners,
You know, to your point, Stefanie, there are resources out there specifically for caregivers. The more we understand the needs and challenges that people have the more that we can develop suitable programming. There are support groups of just caregivers where you can connect and speak with people who get it.
So important. Yeah.
Who know where you're coming from, right? So that, again, you don't feel isolated and alone in what you are experiencing. Okay? So best of luck, Francine. Stefanie, thanks for your time today.
Thank you. It's a beautiful conversation, Carolyn. Thank you for the space.